So this evening, I'm pleased to welcome back Annelise Heinz at this end of the table, who is our moderator for this evening. She also moderated last month's panel for those of you who were here and did a fabulous job. So I'm really pleased she was able to join us again. Annelise is an associate professor and director of graduate studies in the history department here at the University of Oregon. As a historian of modern America, her research focuses on the intersections of gender, race and ethnicity, and sexuality. And then our panelists will introduce themselves, so I'll just let you know who is joining us this evening. I'll start at this end of the table. We have Kate Conley, Jane Gibbons, Pete Thompson, and Connie Newman. They are here to share stories and reflections on women-run presses and print shops and publications, and the outlet that these provided for the women's and lesbian movements. Please join me in welcoming the panel.
Oh, pressure. I'm Kate Thompson. Back in the day, people knew me as Kate Jackrabbit, which was not because it was a particularly woo-woo taken name for me, but because I ran with Jane and some others a print shop called Jackrabbit Press. I came to Eugene in 1971 from Los Angeles. It was a wild time. I hitchhiked and I ran out of money in Springfield. And ended up working at a coffee house on Willamette Street and met Sean O'Reilly. And together, Sean and I, he had a printing press, and we circuitously started a print shop. And that print shop morphed eventually into Jackrabbit Press through many iterations, which would be too long and weird to go through that. So it was a tumultuous time, and I started riding around a motorcycle that Sean had given me, and that was sort of the end of our relationship. And it was a tumultuous time. Sean left, he took his equipment with him, and we got some new equipment, and it became a women's press. We printed, we were not a publication at all, we were a print shop. And this is now kind of a dead technology, but in the day it was very cutting edge, particularly for women to be running machinery. And I'm a total geek, so I was in hog heaven for the most part. But we printed for the progressive community, we printed for women in trades, we printed for political issues that were, as you will hear, all over Eugene at the time. We printed for the gay, LGBTQ, etc. community, uber left, ultra left, left, all of that. We printed for radical sociologists and other university people. We were a union print shop. Although I believe it was IWW, so so okay, we got a raw for IWW there. So we did a lot of political printing as well, and we have many interesting stories to tell. But it was a great time. I eventually left and moved to Seattle, started another print shop, and then history.
Hi, I'm Jane, and I worked at Jackrabbit Press, and Jackrabbit Press was in the upstairs of the Grover's Market building on Willamette Street. And I think I went upstairs to use the bathroom, and I saw Katie running a printing press. And I thought, how does she know how to do that? Like, I was so in awe, and I said, I want to learn how to do this. And she taught me, and Sean taught, and I learned how to run a printing press, which is a tricky machine. And we I don't know, we had so many people come in and out of working there. And it is now a time for a funny story. Anyway, that I moved to Eugene in 1973 from Colorado, and I was working on Big Mama Rag, which was a feminist newspaper in Colorado at the time. And the first thing I did when I got to Eugene was look up to see if there was a feminist newspaper, and there was Women's Press, which Connie will talk about. And yeah, that's how I sort of segued into the community here. So, and I'll tell maybe a little bit later some amusing stories about Jack Rabbit. Connie, you're next.
Okay, I'm Connie. I worked on Women's Press for a few years. It was not my first time working on an alternative or underground newspaper. I came from California, and I lived in a political collective called Sherwood Forest, and our newspaper was called From Out of Sherwood Forest. And we also had a bookstore and organized marches and did things with the Black Panthers and did a whole range of things. But I worked on that newspaper, and by that I don't mean writing, because it was the guys did the writing, and I did lots of layout though. Layout is something also a lost art, where you have a light table, just glass with a light under it, and you put your big sheet on it, and you have some melted glue there that you roll on the back of your articles after you cut them out with scissors. And you and after you have taken in your best writing, made a title for them, which, you know, at least it had to be readable. And then we would glue those on, and then we would talk about the layout, and then we'd pull things off and put them somewhere else. And it was a kind of glue that wasn't permanent. And then we took these big sheets to be printed by a printing press, but not Jack Rabbit. Anyway, that's what I had done when when that group broke up, Sherwood Forest, 4 of us moved up here, and that was in early 72. I went to, I heard about Women's Press, and there was another paper in town, another underground paper called the Auger. And I went to Women's Press, and there was, you know, if you wanted to work on it, you could work on it. You didn't have to fill out any, didn't have to, you know, give your resume or anything. So it was a collective, but it was loose. It had a collective process, but it was kind of loose because people came and went, and lots of people worked on Women's Press over the years, and some of them are in this very room. And I'm hoping they're going to tell their stories about it in a bit.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kate Conley. I think I may have mistakenly squeaked in here because I worked on a magazine from 1995 to 1998 here in Eugene called View Magazine, that I know several of you in this room participated in some way or other. But I moved here somewhat similarly to my panelists friends in 1990, following a girlfriend, my first real girlfriend. I landed in Eugene, and like many quotes around this room, you know, kind of felt like I found Nirvana. And in 1995, after Kelly Weinhold, my former partner, had just earned a bachelor's degree in journalism, and I had been working at what some of you might remember was Astor Publishing, which was, sorry, can you go back one slide?
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. So that's my picture top left and Kelly bottom right. So that was our very first issue, and we called our editorial page The View from Here, which was that item there. But we had some newfound publishing skills and felt like, you know, I sort of feel like it's the old Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney movie. Like, we've got a barn, we've got a sheep, let's have a show. So we had a page maker and some, you know, clunky Macintosh computers, and thought we can do this. And this 1995 would have been after a very terrific popular publication called the Lavender Network here in town had folded, and we saw a gap and wanted to try to fill that in some way. Not saying we did that justice, but that was our attempt. And so we published View from 95 to 98. And for us, it was, our subtitle was A Chronicle of Gay and Lesbian Life. So it was not strictly women oriented, although because we were two women and a lot of our friends who were writing for us were women, you know, it definitely had that meaning. But I wanted to just offer a quote from that next slide one, please. Thank you. The story, Making Waves, which was about lesbian moms taking their kids to swim class. And that line, first line of the story is, sometimes it is the normalness of something that makes it newsworthy. We wanted to serve the gay and lesbian community with news they could use and portray our lives as the normal things that they were. So that was really our goal. For me, it was kind of a journalistic version of, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. And we did that with pieces about politics, or gardening. You might recognize Enid Levin there, top left. Cooking, parenting, art, books, humor, travel, finance, technology. I had fun reading back through the computer column that we did, like how to use a Macintosh. It's really fun. And of course, we had stories about drag queens and slur queens. But it really was a labor of love. And I continue, especially looking around this room at the exhibit and at your faces, to be so grateful for the talented and generous friends that we had, and the talented and generous friends they introduced us to, because that publication would not have happened if it weren't for the collaborative effort. Those folks wrote for us, they managed our distribution. We have circulation of about 4,000 from Ashland to Portland. And they sold advertising. Sally Sheklow was our first ad salesperson. They bought advertising and they read us. And several of you are here tonight. In fact, why don't you raise your hand if you were in the magazine, if you read the magazine, if you bought advertising. Yeah, a lot of folks are still here. And in fact, quite a few loyal advertisers are still in business in town. And I'm going to shout out their names because they are still in business and we'd like them to stay in business. Jay Michaels Books, counselor Barb Ryan, photographer Susan DeTroy, physical therapist Leslie Wallace, Palace Bakery, jeweler Allison Shabosky, attorney Ann Davies, Poppy's Anatolia Restaurant, and then 3 especially loyal advertisers who are no longer in business, but I feel like I need to say their name in some kind of spiritual ritual. L&L Market, which I never knew what L&L actually stood for, but we called it Lesbians and Lovers Market. It was where we all went for brunch on Sunday morning. Yes, if you wanted to meet a girlfriend, make a girlfriend, that's a girlfriend. Mother Colley's Bookstore. There's a fantastic quote on the wall over here. I'm just going to read it real quick. Working at Mother Colley's was the hot ticket. If you could get on there, you just made lesbian superstardom. And then Shamrock Flowers and Gifts, also, which Scott Sunderland just retired about a year ago, so that shop is no longer with us. I mentioned Sally sold advertising for us. She also wrote the gardening column. And I believe, Enid can correct me, but I believe that was her first foray into publishing. And from there, she wrote for Eugene Weekly, and her writings actually ended up getting syndicated in publications across the country. So I feel proud about that. And I think we felt like we kind of made it. And when I say that, I mean, we turned a profit of maybe $500 a month. We were able to buy some syndicated content. And when we bought our first Dykes to Watch Out For comic strip, we had made it. That was something. So that was one of the highlights for me. And of course, 25 years on, I know that B Magazine was kind of a blip in the publishing realm. But we loved doing it. We met amazing people. I hope we built community, and I hope we made our readers feel seen and heard. It was a good time.
Well, thank you so much for your amazing introductions and to all of you for being here. Something that came up in your introductions also leads into this first question, which is, this is the feminist publications that you all were a part of, and print shops that you were part of this amazing national and international network of alternative presses and specifically feminist publications and print shops. And so I was wondering, you mentioned connections to like Big Mama Reg, and I'm wondering if you remember how you first learned about feminist publications, whether that was in Eugene or elsewhere. Just kind of, how did you get connected to this whole publication network? Either as at any level, consumer, producer.
So there were all of these publications, and I recently saw a statistic that this article was talking about the long 60s, which defined it as 1955 to 1972, something like that. So actually, Women's Press kind of just made it in there. But this article was saying there were nearly 500 newspapers, alternative press or underground press. I mean, there were different names for it at different times, but that is a huge number. So these are little presses all over the country. So when I worked before I came here for Sherwood Forest, we exchanged our paper with other little papers all over the country. So we would get it in the mail because there wasn't an online option then. So we had those in our store, but we also got some of our news there. We read those papers, they read our papers, so they found out what we were doing, and we found out what was happening in Boston. Some of that was useful, and we also, because we were all teaching ourselves how to make a newspaper, we would look at what they were doing. How did they do their borders, stuff like that. You have to do borders. So it was also true at Women's Press that we exchanged papers with other women's underground papers from lots of different states. We had them there physically in our office, and we learned from them and we sent them ours. What was the question again? How did we learn about it?
Yeah, the original connection to feminist publication networks or print shops. You don't all have to answer if you don't feel like you have an answer, but you're welcome to.
Well, not as a publication, but in 1974 or 5, Jackrabbit hosted a Women in Print conference, and it was attended by women from all over the West Coast, and actually a few from the East Coast as well. And it I think made us incredibly aware of how many presses there were. Now, of course, there are none, but at that time there were, I think, 4 presses alone in the East Bay, San Francisco area. And that's kind of amazing when you think of that level of equipment. So that was, although again, not a publication, that made us aware of sort of the network of women doing what we were doing.
So you also talked about the connections to the alternative press more generally, and I was wondering, in your experiences, were there aspects that made the publications and print shops you were connected to specifically feminist? What were the differences between what you experienced, or similarities, right? So how did it fit into this larger kind of milieu in the 70s, 80s, or 90s?
Well, Jackrabbit was interesting because we did a lot of women's issue printing. We did a lot of national printing. We printed the Weather Underground's first book at night, totally on the down low. We also did local, like, food labels and business cards and just sort of printing stuff. But I think we were definitely a conduit for people who were writing poetry or art or political posters. And the fact that it was all women in this print shop made us stand out, because we were an anomaly. And so I think to that end, we were, just a conduit to a lot of different aspects of, art and politics and so on, that otherwise, and again, I'll tell the story in a little bit, but I think there may have been publications that a group might not have been comfortable taking to a regular print shop, and we were, there with open arms, so.
Tell the story.
No, we're keeping you here. No one leaves till she tells that
It's to
story.
the end.
So Women's Press was, the purpose of Women's Press, the stated purpose was to provide a feminist voice and a voice for all women too, where women in those days didn't have a voice. And, if you read the regular old newspapers, women were only on society and fashion pages pretty much. I mean, there might have been reporters writing obituaries and other things, but the news was all about men and what men were doing. So it was a huge need from my point of view, from all of our points of view, that there be something that spoke for women, about women, and to women. And that's what Women's Press was. So, that's too easy of a question. It was the feminist voice in town.
I wanted to say one other thing though, is that I think all of us, it was also the beginning, I mean, we were part of a feminist movement, we knew it, but it was also the beginning of unity and ties between, say, the internationalist movements. We printed for the Iranian Students' Union, now this is before the fall of Iran. We printed for the Eritrean students, and they were printing basically materials that would eventually probably get them killed in their own countries. So we were beginning to also forge these bonds across LGBTQ and across feminist lines that I think held, and then became a really good foundation for later on when Prop 13 and all the other things started to happen, because I think it built a larger community as well.
Because we were a gay and lesbian magazine, I wouldn't really say that we went in with a strong feminist philosophy, but because we were two women producing a publication, it crept in our content choices and the issues we chose to cover. For example, we had a very powerful story on women and breast cancer. So, it was there, although if somebody had come and said, you're a feminist publication, we'd probably said, no, we're not. But we won't get in.
Well, and there a couple of things also came up both in the oral histories that are recorded and earlier in terms of the gender breakdown of labor, right? With the Sherwood press, it was like, well, women aren't doing the writing. Is that right? And Kate, I think in your interview, you talked about how in the Village Voice, there's always fights about if it was a man or woman on the cover, because it was a woman, then.
Because women would always buy a cover with a man on it if it was about gay things, but men would not buy paper with a woman on it. We changed that though. We found the butchest woman we could.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say that it wasn't that women were forbidden from writing for underground papers, for instance, but if you were in a collective with men and the men were I mean, it was patriarchal, that's the word. So in my particular collective, before I moved here, there was one woman, one of the women, one of us, did write articles. And, but the rest of us kind of didn't, because it wasn't impossible, but it wasn't encouraged. It wasn't really our paper in the same way that Women's Press was later.
So you might already know the first panel was organized around collectives and communal kind of experiences and consensus decision making. So I was wondering how your publications in Jackrabbit made decisions. What was the kind of authority structure? How did things get meted up? Was it all consensus? Was it all hierarchy? How did you do that? And did it change over time?
Well, so, many of you know what it's like to work with your partner. It's not always smooth sailing. But we also, I mean, between us, we just negotiated this modified consensus probably. If that can be a thing with two people. But we actually really did embrace our contributors and, sought advice from readers and writers to make sure that we were, offering up the content people wanted. So there was a lot of collaboration, and it was, while we had, Kelly and I took clear roles as editor and publisher, it was very organic and collaborative, and we solicited opinions when we needed to seek opinions outside the two of us, which was pretty much every issue.
I think we did everything kind of as a consensus. We didn't, let's just say that the way Jackrabbit ran, if you were to compare it to a conventional business, there was no hierarchy, but there wasn't a whole lot of other stuff either. Like, it was just, we just were in there doing it.
We argued a lot.
Yeah, we hammered it out, but I think, I was trying to remember, I think maybe we had weekly meetings.
We did.
And talked about how things were going, but so that's what I remember. I don't remember anything.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Our ideal was decision-making by consensus, and that wasn't ideal back then. So, and that's hard and it's time consuming. Fortunately, Women's Press only came out once a month, so we had time. We had time to, and it wasn't so much that we were arguing. We basically wanted to print whatever women wrote and gave to us. We tried to put in there, and then we wrote some of it ourselves. And we, at a certain point, said, well, we're going to have a theme for each of our issues and collect writings about that. But yeah, it was kind of all by consensus, and sometimes it went late into the night, especially if it was the day that we were gonna lay out in the paper and then take it off to the Springfield press the next day. It might be all night, but there was not a person, there was not an editor. Sometimes people took tasks, like the task of going out and finding advertising. I would never do that, but there were people who wanted to do that, so that was good. And there were people who were more artistic and they did the artistic stuff. But it was kind of, nobody was being assigned that. We would say, we need this, and we'd look around at each other and then tell someone, you have a funny story about that, Judy? You're laughing. Oh, okay. Yeah, so consensus, that was the thing.
Well, what were the best parts of your experiences working in these presses or print shops, and what was the worst part? You can choose both or either.
I think one of the things that was hard was not being taken seriously as women who were operating these machines. And, you know, in the very beginning, when we went into vendors to buy ink, to buy paper, I think everybody kind of like, who are these people? You know, like they don't know what we're doing, but we hung in there long enough for people to take us seriously. But, and you know, there were funny things about that too. This isn't the big funny story. I'll tell a little one, which was that, you know, people were intrigued by us, and a guy came into the shop one day and was standing at the counter, and he wanted to know if it would be okay if he would come behind the counter and see the printing equipment. And we said, sure. And we had this huge cast iron paper cutter. And it was over to the side. The presses were back farther. And he pointed to it. He goes, oh yeah, I printed on one of these before. And Katie and I always said the joke after that, well, how is it inking up that really sharp blade? Anyway, so there were amusing moments like that. And I think, you know, there were times when we were cranking things out where it, you know, we were proud of what we were doing, and we loved what we were doing, and we were committed to it. And it was great working with the women, you know, each other. It was pretty rewarding. So
I think it's interesting to know how unusual it was back then to find women doing the trades of any kind. And so one of the things I'm proudest of is the women we trained to do what we did, and to, you know, greater and lesser degrees of success. But you know, sometimes there were a lot of high-pitched screams and
tools flying.
and tools flying. But I think that I took great pride in being able to show people, because we were trained to think that these complicated machines were, you know, too complicated to understand, even though women had for a long time been operating sewing machines, which make printing presses look pretty simple. So it was really, it was wonderful to be able to show women that they could do this, and they could, you know, and printing presses are all about process and eventually about muscle memory, you know, remembering what to do and how to do it. And it's a lot of complicated processes all lined up. And so when you saw the light go on in somebody's eyes, it was just, yeah.
Well, it was great to be at the center of the women's community, the lesbian community. We had an office when I worked in Women's Press, upstairs from what became the first Starflower warehouse. And it was a little apartment. So it wasn't a public place. We weren't in a public place like Jackrabbit was. You had to know where we were and know someone who could, you know, let you in. But it was the heart of something. It was the heart of this thinking community, and that felt really good. And some people here might know, talk about relationships that started in that very apartment upstairs from what would be the Starflower warehouse. But
Raise your hand.
Sure.
she's not gonna raise her hand again. Yeah, so that was good. And I don't know, you know, this for me, well, something that was hard was over and over again trying to approach a theory or a theory of class in the feminist movement. And we might look around that room where we were trying to get this paper out and say, oh, everyone here is middle class. And people would say that without really knowing what that meant, and that wouldn't necessarily be true. Oh, but we don't have any poor women here, but that's because they're all working. It was confusing, and we could have used the study session. And the same with race. Where people go, oh, it's Eugene, everyone's white. Well, everyone's not white, but that's a way of kind of not dealing with it. And so those discussions sometimes were circular and difficult to find resolution or to find a common understanding, and that was true of the whole movement, and that was true of the whole country. So, yeah, and in the end, we had to get that paper out, and that's what we turned around and did.
I think the dark room and Jackrabbit serve the same purpose.
I think I touched on this earlier, but for me, the best part was just meeting all the people we wrote about, the people who wrote for us. The advertisers and building a community, which is a community that's sustained me for the 25 years since then. And thank you to friends who are here tonight. And those relationships that I made back then that are still with me. I think the worst part was just not being able to continue to publish the magazine. We went for 3 years, and lives changed, and we did try to sell it, and just didn't get any nibbles that made us feel comfortable passing it on. But that was, it's like letting your baby go.
It's time for the story. One particularly memorable moment, something hilarious, surprising, meaningful. I'd love to hear from everyone. They're all teed up.
I'll tell the story. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that Jackrabbit offered was a place for different groups, bringing material that they wouldn't necessarily want to walk into a conventional print shop with. And I apologize to anyone that knew the group that put this publication out, because I don't remember the name of the group that did it, but the name of the book, it was a small book with a lot of beautiful artistic women. It was called What Lesbians Do. And it was about what lesbians do. And the day that we were printing What Lesbians Do, we were printing the cover, and there was a beautiful yet sensual sexual drawing on the cover of a woman kind of splayed in a bed. And this was the day that the Eugene Fire Department decided to come and inspect the upstairs of the growers market. And because when you print and there's a lot of ink on whatever you're printing, you have to lay it around in piles. So all over the entire print shop, What Lesbians Do, What Lesbians Do, What Lesbians Do. All over the inside of the dark room, on a table. And here comes the Eugene Fire Department. And we were like, and they said, oh, we're upstairs. We'd like to inspect the building every once in a while in case there's a fire. We were familiar with the building, and we just looked at each other and thought, well, come on in. Anyway, there were lots of funny situations. There was also a time when I was cutting Kate's hair, and we were out in the outside in the hall outside the shop, and we were doing a lot of political printing, let's just say. And this guy comes up, and he's kind of in a suit, and I'm cutting Kate's hair, and he goes, well, I'm looking for Kate Thompson. And Kate said, well, who's asking? He said, well, I'm with the FBI. And we both just said, oh, what? We don't know. I think she and I could go on and on, but I will pass the mic.
What I want to say about the fire department, is that it was a long build. The art space was a long space that had an L in it, and L was the dark room, and it was about 9 guys.
No women in it.
No women in the fire department, no. And they all filed single slowly. And they turned the corner, and they went into what dark rooms, and that was all over the dark room. Only now it was in red light. And they stayed in there for about maybe 3 minutes. And then they all filed, and they never said a word. The end of it, the head guy turned to us and said, "We'll be sending you a report." And we like to think that somewhere, some retired fire guy is telling this very story.
We don't really have those. We never got inspected by the fire department. If anyone here who worked on women's press has a story to tell, now's the time. And remember, I know who you are.
It's hard to follow that story. There's more, I don't know how hard it would be to find a slide. I mean, it's like the second to the last one. It's US West sucks. It's there. Maybe not, sorry. So I found this funny because Kelly and I would angst greatly over the content for each issue, and you know, we wanted to be thoughtful and mindful and inclusive and all of those things. But one month we were driven over the edge by what was then the phone company called US West. And then,
Oh, it's the middle one.
thank you. And then, so US West Sucks was the most well-received letter generating column we ever published. And it's all about the fact that when we moved houses, we had a business line for View magazine, and they cut off our line, and for reasons still unclear to me, couldn't restore it for like a month. So we were losing business, obviously. And there was this fantastic column berating the phone company, and it just made me laugh that of all the like highfalutin news stories or important political issues that we tried to cover, this is the thing that people wrote us letters to the editor about, like in raging support. So again, sometimes the normalness is the newsworthy thing.
We would love to welcome your questions and or memories, comments. We have a microphone to share too.
Question?
Well, I would just say after that last story that the phrase that was common at that time is, we're the phone company. We don't care.
Just a question, yeah, I think you mentioned that the printing press was owned. The printing press was owned by a man that you connected with when you came.
The first ones we had, yeah.
And so what happened to the actual press, and did you as a woman ever get any ownership of that in the labor that you put into?
Oh, yeah, no, no,
We own the.
we own the presses. Sean had his. Where's Sean?
Sean's here.
Sean's there. Yeah.
Came here in December of '69. SDS started a project called Northwest Radical Activity Project. And the idea was that they're going to research the financial power structure of the machine and find out who was the money behind politics. And so anyway, out of that press, in 360, we got a gig from the guy here at the university, and then Bill Gray, published a book called Cultivators in Marijuana. And that kind of financed our press. And we did that up on 24th and Lamb Street Garage. Or actually 23rd Emerald, and then we moved to 24th and Lamb. And after a while, SDS really didn't want to run a press and have all the responsibility of buying all the equipment. You're running the media rollers and some other stuff. And so they ceded the press to me. And then I moved it from there up to Third and Pearl, and then to where Jack was the grower market. We were the first business in there. We had a Union District 360. I could borrow the press from Cotton Hands. I was a friend of mine, he had a press in storage. Use this, and so we had another EDA. And then Jane bought a model. And that was the first Newman's press. I bought a Harris, with a cape here in San Francisco. Bought this 22-inch Harris. To start printing, we had a job for the Centric magazine. And Brian Litter said, "I just posted it." Way beyond our team. Brian, was a designer, not a printer. So he liked to paint the sheet of paper. He made it kind of difficult to print. But after that, we ran along as Jackrabbit Press. We basically worked from Vision Works to Jackrabbit Press. And then I split off Jackrabbit Press in there and I changed to Collections Press.
And getting that Harris out of the second floor of the Growers Market was one of the most epic, anarchic, and death-defying things we've ever done. And it's amazing any of us are still alive.
Press up there. You know, that's not a whole group.
Oh,
I mean, JD and all of them. All of them. You mentioned it up to a freight elevator, those floors, brother, what it was. So then, at the same time, freight elevator got framed in and turned into an office. That was ready to get out. 75% printing press, huge. You had to run down a set of steps. So I took it apart. Got some rollers, market loose box. We laid those down the stairs, we aimed it down, we slid that baby down.
And down Fifth Street.
Yeah.
And then I pushed it and put it back together, and put it in my hand. Down to Fifth Street, all the way to Fifth Street, Pearl Street, all the way to Pearl Street, third Pearl, there, the FBI followed.
Yeah, that's it. And then Jane bought the Hamada, and then we bought a multi-lift as well, I believe.
Sean left.
Yeah, you left the multi-lift and we had that, so, and we traded that for the house. So it all worked out and it was completely women owned, so.
The camera stayed back.
Yes, and the camera stayed.
Can anyone say more about the FBI?
About
Oh,
The FBI was called primarily because we were involved. It started at Vision Works, really. I started talking to a fellow in the band about doing publication of Weather Underground. And over the course of the next couple of years, the articles got written, the book got written, and the information went back and forth, and finally got typeset. And by that time, we had moved to Jackrabbit. And we had Harris up there, so we ran all of that paper, that book, on Harris. With the original agreement being that we were going to do it in signatures. Our signature is flat sheet of paper with pages on it, aggregated in such a way that when they're folded up, they get stacked and then sawed off the back. We set the whole thing up that way. We did all the camera work, we did paste it, we had it on press. And then Van decided we're not going to spend $500 for that whole that would allow us to do this. So at that point, we had to cut all the paper down into individual pages. And it went out. People came from the East Coast, rented a building that was in Main Street, and they brought people into Conley. The problem was, yeah, all kinds of people coming and going to Conley. Pages got put in upside down, pages got turned around, pages were missing. Anyway,
Do you want to jump in on FBI?
And I know we have some other questions actually, so I would-
Yeah, is that, yes. There was a lot of FBI activity in Eugene, actually, when we were on 11th Street. The FBI had set up a camera across the way in an old Chinese restaurant and took pictures of everybody that went in and out of the print shop. And including the postman. And I actually later got my FOIA files. And the best part of the FOIA is for the first bit until Jackrabbit, I was always described as subject's girlfriend. I became dangerous and then running. So.
Outlaw. Yeah, when we read our files later, they were staked out in that building and, they would say things like, so someone from Jackrabbit walked to their car. I mean, it was all, they were watching us all the time.
And one other, and this involves other colleagues' books, which is that we printed a handbook called 5 Easy Questions because the FBI was knocking on a lot of lesbian doors back then. And if you talked to the FBI at all, if you opened yourself up to any question, you could be dragged in front of the grand jury. You had no right then to not talk. And so we printed a comic book called 5 Easy Questions and Grand Jury Comics. Mother colleagues distributed it. Actually, Lori, his name, last name McLean, right? Distributed under the rubric Amazon Reality. And in the FBI files, there was some musing by one of the agents as whether it was actually Amazon Realty. And they were looking for steakhouses.
And all the rebel rousing and revolutionary things I was involved in, the only time the FBI knocked on my door, it was about Jackrabbit Press. I wasn't part of, but Kate and I were roommates and I was all alone. It was night and there's a knock and there's this guy looking just like an FBI agent. And actually there were two of them, identified themselves and started asking questions, but because the whole community had been educated about, basically about what not to say, I kept saying, talk to my lawyer, talk to my lawyer. I answered every question. I was quaking inside because, the FBI, they could shoot me, but they didn't, they went away. It was good.
Yeah. Question, and I should know this because I moved to Eugene in 1972, and I believe, I don't know when Women's Press started or who started it, and I've worked at Women's Press as well as Jackrabbit, but I don't know the origin story, and
Probably should. That's a good question.
I don't know the origin story. So I started there in early 72. And it had already been going, but not for very long. I think maybe it started in 71 and it had like 3 or 4 issues out. So yes, whoever those women are, they had disappeared and they didn't tell us.
I know Marianne Gould,
Marianne Gould.
blessed memory, was one of the early mothers, sisters, but I don't know how it started.
Yeah, no, mystery.
Was Betsy Brown?
Way later.
I don't know the answer to that either, but I work in special collections and university archives, and I think we have a complete run of the Women's Press and our Oregon collection, which is our print resource of material. So if anybody wants to come over to special collections, we have a security copy there. And my hope is that at some point we can digitize every single issue and put it up online so people would have access to it that way. But yeah, everybody's welcome to come over to special collections if you want to look, and you can see the very first issue and see, they might have named themselves only by first names. So, instead of, first name, last name, as a policy, but but we can, we'll find out.
Can I have a microphone real quickly?
Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to follow up because Linda is so modest. It is Linda Long, who was one of the people. Who not only helped create this entire oral history project and this fabulous exhibit with Lauren and Julie Raskin, but also has almost single-handedly made the University of Oregon Special Collections one of the world's most significant repositories of lesbian history. Again, really. Big shout out to Linda. I couldn't just let that go. Other questions for?
Just a couple of comments. I don't remember any other printing presses except for Jackrabbit. I'm thinking about, when in Wallflower Order, when we would have our stuff printed, I'm thinking, did we even know about any other presses? I mean, were there places like FedEx and stuff like that around them?
I know.
There were, because when I put Jackrabbit.
There was actually a political press here called Northwest Working Press.
Yeah,
And-
will do.
Yeah, and Herb Everett.
Yeah.
And I actually worked there at some point, but that was later. So I don't know, that must have happened after Jackrabbit.
I think it was concurrent, but we
It was
weren't.
the same time.
They took a camera, some equipment, and Howard Madison Street, and started another print shop.
I just had one other part of the comment I wanted to make, which was, so in Wallflower, we would tour the country, and one of the most exciting things was to get to see women's press in all these places, in
Cool.
Boston and Helena, Montana. It's like, wow, it's very, very special. I have a question about Jackrabbit. Was there ever anybody that, any disagreements about whether to print something for someone or not?
I don't recall any.
I don't recall that. I don't think so.
Yeah, we don't recall any. There were clients that we liked better than others.
Jackrabbit press this.
When did you move to Stowe?
It started in 1973, and I moved to Seattle in late 76, early 77,
And then I went for another 2 or 3 years. How long did
so
you
does
work?
anybody good at math there? 6 years, yeah, 5 years.
Judy, how long did you work at Jackrabbit?
A year and a half.
Yeah, yeah, after Kate left, we continued for 2 or 3 more years, and then we disbanded, and I ended up working in a regular print shop in Eugene, like an Instaprint kind of place, where this guy from California bought a couple presses, was a franchise. He didn't know anything about printing presses, and he hired me to run the presses, and so I worked there for a while, but I couldn't remember how many years. Yeah.
I just want to say that, I mean, I remember when Jackrabbit got a gig with Genesis Juice, which is still going. I think it's now under the Toby's Food umbrella. But it was a four color separation printing job for their labels. I think I might have a label.
Oh, really?
I definitely have, I should have brought them tonight, I didn't think I had, some bumper stickers, sisters pick up sisters, and Jackrabbit Press, and I'd rather be smashing imperialism. And, so. Yeah. Wonderful variety of activities and jobs. Yeah. And the other thing that I think of, that both of these endeavors were in buildings that weren't accessible.
Mhm.
And
Right.
just a different perspective. There were up steep staircases, both at Growers Market and at the Star Flower Building. So that's different than what we would have done now. And then also picking up on what Kate was saying, this is still part, Vietnam War was still going on. So we were all part, like as we talked about at the collectives panel, part of this world, international and national movement to end the war, to support civil rights and racial justice and women's rights. And so it wasn't in a vacuum by any way.
You touched a little bit about how suppliers and all, reacted to you and everything. I'm curious about, were there any particular allies or adversaries in the so-called mainstream press of your time?
Actually, there were some, the way printing was back then, there weren't a lot of small shops as much. There were some sort of more mid-sized and larger shops. Women's Press was printed in Springfield on a web press, which is a completely different press than we ran. It's a press that runs a continuous roll. But I remember that there were times that we would go, I can't remember the name of the press. I want to say Heath, but I don't think that's right. When we would run out of something and something was closed and we needed to get it, that printers would help printers. But yeah, I remember we would make runs up to Portland regularly to go to the warehouses and it was, I mean, it's so weird to think of now, but it was unusual then for women to walk in, and buy, 20 pounds of black ink, so.
Well, this is a little bit of a jog from that question, but when we bought the Hamada, the second press that we got, Kate and I went to a showroom in Portland to look at the presses, and we've done a lot of research and we were pretty sure that's what we wanted. And we walked around the showroom and you got to try running it and doing different things. And then it was like going to a car lot. Then the guy took us back off the showroom into his office and he sort of leaned back and said, well, so, and we said, yeah, we want it. We want the Hamada, 600 or whatever it's called. And he just reeled in his chair and he said, you're buying it? yeah, we are. And I remember him saying, well, I need a drink. And he reached under his desk for this little tiny fridge and pulled out a beer. I guess he just wasn't quite ready for us to pull out our checkbook.
To your question about allies, V Magazine was also printed at Springfield News. And, Springfield, 1990s, we didn't necessarily play nicely. And it was always interesting to go in there with our job and, guys who run these big web presses, they're big guys and we're just trotting in there with our little gay and lesbian magazine ready to print. But we never got a whiff of homophobia. And I don't know if it's just because we were just another job that meant money. But I couldn't truly call them allies in the sense that there was activity there, but there was no hint of homophobia, which at the time I appreciated greatly.
Yeah.
And I don't remember anything from the Springfield News. It was just very businesslike. And the person who took our finished product over to the press there had to be someone who had a car. So there was only a limited number of people who could do that. I didn't have a car, so I didn't actually meet those people in person. But as far as the regular press, the register guard never took, as far as I know, any notice whatsoever of women's press. It was like a different universe. They were big in those days, and they're almost gone now. And it just You know, we were just in this community and in this larger women's movement. And there was such a divide between what we were doing and what we were thinking, and this is the straight world around us.
Oh, yeah, wasn't there a time when something happened with the relationship with the Springfield Press and we had to drive to Toledo, Oregon to find, which is towards Newport, it's practically in Newport, I think, or far, especially if you didn't have a car, to find a press that was willing to print for us.
Well, now that you mention it, no, I'm not really remembering the details. I thought maybe their equipment was broken down. But I could be wrong. Could have been something more.
Well, thinking about, as you're mentioning, these buildings and places you're in, something that really strikes me is the centrality of the Starflower building. So it sounds like Jackrabbit started underneath Starflower's warehouse, right? And Women's Press was starting upstairs, is that correct? So
We were upstairs.
you were upstairs.
And so was.
So this building was it? So it was a lot of work. That, does anyone know how all of these things got concentrated in one building?
So it wasn't one building.
Oh, okay.
But actually, Jackrabbit for about 2 months was underneath it at Starflower, but every time somebody would walk overhead, grain would fall into it.
Right. So Cheryl and I are trying to remember this, before we came here tonight, and we were trying to remember when exactly Starflower started, because it seems like Women's Press was there before Starflower was there. And are you speaking, Judy? So eventually Starflower Botanicals was in that office and Women's Press went somewhere else, and that was after I wasn't working with Women's Press anymore. So I don't know, but I was working at Starflower and yet I don't remember. You know what? It was really a long time ago. Should have written it down. Should have kept journals, but you know, there was the FBI thing. That was really a factor for me. What I wrote down and that I don't have pictures from the 70s. It was a factor. You could go to jail for the rest of your life. Nobody wants to do that.
Okay, I think we're gonna have a final question here, which is if you could reflect back on, you know, why, whether this was your thought at the beginning of your involvement with these presses and publications or at the end, why did it matter?
How could it not matter? How could it not matter? It mattered so much because women didn't have a voice and because women's options were and had forever been so limited. And because there were huge movements in the country too that pushed us toward liberation. There was the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement and this was. Some of us came out of those movements to the women's movement. The first political thing that I did was in high school, I think. And that was getting a bunch of people to sign a petition that girls not have to wear dresses every single day. Because that was the rule. And we won that one and we got by getting a Friday option for wearing pants. Yeah. And so, you know, it's good to have a success and it's good to get started with a success. And that was, yeah, and went on from there. But I mean, there are things that you have to do or we'd still be back there wearing dresses and nylons and possibly heels. And we don't want to be there. And when you see one of those battles, the first little battle, then your vistas are widened and you see more that you could do. So we do it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Everything you said.
I would just also add that few months ago, I went to the memorial service of a friend who was a firefighter, actually was a commander in the Seattle Fire Department. And the fire departments from not just Seattle, but all over the entities were lined up. There must have been maybe 5,000 people there. And it was an amazing service, but that is what the culmination, or at least the progress of women in the trades was about, was that she, an out gay woman, was so revered. It would not have happened, I think, without the whole women in the trades movement. We were a small part of that.
Yeah. I think what we alluded to earlier about being a platform for people to talk and or get out political information, information about being gay or lesbian, all the different groups that we printed for. And on top of that, being women that were breaking out and doing a non-traditional job for women, and how empowering that was. And it was the flavor of the time, and it was exciting. And I think that it's an interesting question, because I've never really asked myself that, but it's something that I think continue to think about, because I think we were doing something, and I don't think we even realized at the time how important it was.
Visibility matters. It did then, it does now. I see some young people in the audience, and I think we just have to keep being visible, so that other people understand that we are everywhere, that we look a whole lot of different ways, that we believe in a whole lot of different things. But we're here, we're queer, and get used to it.
A round of applause for. Thank you all so much for being here. And also please spend some time, if you haven't already, with the exhibit. And we have some wonderful images from Women's Press and Jackrabbit over here. Also images of Wallflower Dance Collective. And a quote from Connie Newman.
Well, if anyone sees my other earring.
And amazing.